In post-war America, organized crime wasn't always found in smoky back rooms or dimly lit social clubs. Sometimes it wore a business suit, carried a union card, and sat at the head of a bargaining table. History remembers the famous names, but behind every headline, there are men operating in the shadows, men who never sought the spotlight, yet quietly shaped the course of organized crime, politics, and power in America. One of those men was Anthony Tony Provenzano, a feared mafia captain, a powerful Teamsters union boss, and a man with connections stretching from New Jersey's docks to the highest levels of organized crime. To some, he was a respected labor leader. To others, he was a ruthless enforcer whose influence reached far beyond what the public ever saw. His name has surfaced in murders, corruption scandals, labor racketeering, and perhaps most famously, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Welcome to the very first episode of the podcast By the Sword. I'm your host, Evan Bryant, and together we'll explore the people, the evidence, and the untold stories hidden beneath the surface of history. Every episode will separate documented facts from enduring myths to uncover the events that still continue to spark debate decades later. This is the story of Anthony Tony Provenzano. Born May 7th, 1917 in New York City, New York, Provenzano rose through the ranks of the Mafia and the Teamsters Union. Pro had become one of the most powerful members of the Genovese crime family, one of New York's 5 families. But before his rise to power, Pro quit school at the age of 15 to work as a truck helper for the H.P. Welch Trucking Company. It was there, amongst the diesel hum, he would learn hard work. 3 years later, he would become a driver, dockman, and a shop steward. Here, Pro would brush his elbows and cut his teeth with a man by the name of Salvatore Sally Russo, a formidable trucking magnate and a man connected in the Genovese. By 1948, Pro had worked his way up to being a business agent for the local 560 Teamsters Union. As an agent, he would be introduced to another Genovese member, Salvatore Sally Bugs Bergoglio. Bergoglio acted as a trusted enforcer and hitman and close lieutenant under Provenzano. Anthony Provenzano would brush elbows and shake hands with many legal and illegal individuals. It only took Tony Pro 10 years to accumulate enough influence to become president of the local 560 in Union City, New Jersey, becoming one of the most influential union locals on the East Coast. To supporters, he was an effective labor leader who delivered higher wages and protected union jobs. To federal prosecutors, he was far more dangerous. A feared mafia captain in the Genovese crime family, Pro operated under the likes of Anthony Tony Bender Strollo, a close ally and friend of family boss Vito Genovese. Strollo would serve as underboss for several years. When Strollo had allegedly crossed Genovese, he ordered Strollo to disappear. He wasn't the only one to vanish. In 1961, then Secretary-Treasurer Anthony Three-Finger Casalito went missing. It's alleged that the mafia associates Salvatore Sally Bugs Bergoglio and Harold Kronsberger murdered Castellito and disposed of him in upstate New York. A few months later, Pro's brother was appointed the position of trustee, a position which was once held by Castellito. In later years, while running for the Teamsters 560 president, he bumped heads with a rival opposition, a local group calling themselves United. They had ran 2 candidates in the years 1962 and 65, losing both years. It was suspected that Pro had his competition eliminated, but that simply wasn't true, at least 100%. Although it wasn't a candidate, it was someone who had a problem. Walter Glockner had approached Tony Pro only to get into a scuffle with him. The next morning, Glockner would be found shot dead outside of his Hoboken home. Provenzano's short fuse wasn't only directed towards those involved in union politics, but drivers. According to legend, drivers who entered the front door for a meeting with Pro would leave through the window. To ensure his control, he would enforce his might. He and his officials would provide protection to carriers. They'd collect what was called off-the-books cash for carriers, and perks came with the job. His New Jersey home, in which he lived in, was given to him as a gift by a carrier. But by 1959, public concern over corruption and organized labor had reached Washington. The Senate's McLennan Committee, formerly known as the Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management, had launched an extensive investigation. Spearheading the investigation was a young attorney, Robert F. Kennedy. Tony Pro appeared before the committee invoking his Fifth Amendment right, a record 44 times, refusing to answer investigators' questions. Question after question, he provided nothing. If his Senate hearing made headlines, then his suspected involvement in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa definitely would. In 1960, Tony Pro was indicted on extortion charges. He was sentenced to 7 years but had only served 4.5. While imprisoned in Lewisburg Prison, he was serving time with a fellow ally and friend at the moment, Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa was serving time on fraud charges. Provenzano reportedly had issues with his Teamster pension fund. When Hoffa informed Pro he had nothing to do with it or could help, tensions between the two would rise. After Hoffa's release, he and 2 other associates would arrange a meeting in which Hoffa was now seeking Pro's help and influence to regain his seat as Teamsters president. When Pro refused, threats were exchanged. What once was a tolerable relationship became a bitter feud. When Hoffa was released and his sentence was commuted due to President Nixon's receiving a sizable donation towards his campaign, Tony Pro would unfortunately not receive the same, serving his sentence from 1966 to 1970. Tony Pro and Jimmy Hoffa would go on working in a civil tangent with each other. But by the time 1975 is when things started to take a turn. Jimmy Hoffa vanished. Separate from fact and myth, reports say Hoffa was to meet Provenzano and Tony Jack Giacalone at the Mack House Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield, Michigan. What happened next has sparked debate, conspiracy, and myth. Many fates have surfaced over the years, from encased in cement to dropped in the ocean, but no evidence as to what happened to Jimmy Hoffa has ever surfaced. The closest is an FBI memo regarding Hoffa's fate. It appears Hoffa has suffered the same fate as Local 560 Secretary Castellito, in which Castellito's body was put through a garbage shredder and his remains were burned in an incinerator. And so Anthony Provenzano would become part of America's greatest mysteries. By 1975, Pro would face numerous amounts of indictments. One for conspiracy to violate the anti-kickback statute after receiving $2.3 million from the Teamsters Pension Fund, in which he was later convicted in 1978. But before that, he received a 4-year sentence. And in 1976, he was indicted in New Jersey court along with Bergoglio and Kronsberg in conspiracy and murder in connection to the 1961 death of Anthony Three Finger Castellito. He was convicted of murder in 1978 and was sentenced to life. He received another indictment shortly after that on RICO charges and received an additional 20 years. Tony Provenzano died in a federal penitentiary in Lockbaum, California on December 12, 1988, taking many of his secrets with him. Whether he ordered murders, orchestrated disappearances, or simply knew more than he ever admitted may never be fully answered. His silence became part of his legacy, and perhaps his greatest weapon.